A few years ago, the absurd Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, suggested that Sharia law should be integrated into British law in our family and domestic courts. And I took part in a panel at that time saying why I think that's a despicable and ridiculous idea. And the discussion ranged pretty widely onto multiculturalism and how it's used as a cover for religion. Here's how it went.
I think it's a big issue. I won't call it the biggest issue in the world, but I think it's a very, very big issue. And I think part of the problem is the way we're responding in Europe is we have actually quite a flawed ideological framework, which is multiculturalism. Now, when you criticise multiculturalism, it's very important that you when someone like me criticises it, it's very important to preface it by saying, this is usually lumped in with immigration. You'll hear the right saying, multiculturalism and immigration have caused X, Y, or Z problem. I passionately believe in I wouldn't exist if it were not for immigration. I passionately believe in immigration. I think we need more immigrants and more refugees in this country, not fewer. But I believe it is a disastrous way to welcome them. To say, hello Muslim, you have arrived, here is a Muslim box for us to put you in, where you will be a Muslim forevermore, and you will behave in a way that our appointed Muslim spokesmen, who happen to be extremely reactionary imams, think you should behave. I think we should say, hi, you're here, you want to pay taxes, you want to be British, you're one of us, and we will treat you exactly the same. You are an equal human being, you are not defined by your group. If I can give the most, well, I think it's the most egregious example within Europe of where I think multiculturalism has gone wrong, let's look at Germany. The German constitution has a requirement, I think a terribly flawed requirement, to respect a person's religion. And I just want to give a couple of quick examples of what that has meant. There was a woman called Zainab, who was a German woman. Her parents had come from Algeria when she was a child. And she got married to a man who was extremely violently abusive. And there was no question about the evidence. He was convicted of beating her and beating her child. And in Germany, you have to be separated for 2 years before you can be granted a divorce. If you want to get it sooner, and obviously she did, she wanted this disgusting man out of her life, you have to go to court. So she went to court. She presented the evidence, no one disputed the evidence, his lawyers didn't dispute the evidence that he'd been violent. The judge, who was a female German judge, came back and said, well, I've looked at this case, and there's no question this man is abusive. But equally, the Constitution requires that I look at your religion. And I've been reading the Quran and the Hadith, and she read out the passage from the Hadith, which actually recommends domestic violence if your wife gets too uppity. And the judge effectively said, well, that's your culture. So for that reason, I'm declining your request. Have a good marriage. This is not an exception. This is not rare in Germany at the moment. There have been a number of so-called honour killings in which women have expressed the freedom that I have taken for granted all my life, to choose my own partner, to behave in any way I want to sexually, and in which the woman's relatives conspired in a premeditated way to murder her. And the verdicts were reduced to manslaughter, and the judge in one case said, I'm doing this because I understand that this woman violated your Anatolian moral precepts. Another example, this is a much smaller example, but I think it's very revealing. There was a 14-year-old girl who wanted to go on a school trip. She happened to be, well, she didn't self-identify as Muslim, her family were Muslim. And the school trip was further away than a camel could travel in a day, which is as far as the Quran says you can go from your father. But the girl wanted to go, and her parents wouldn't let her. So the school, entirely to their credit, I don't think a British school would do this, went to court for the right for this girl to go where she wanted. And the judge said, and these were his words, under law, we recognise that a retarded person has to be accompanied by a minor. I see no reason why this should not apply to Muslim women. Now, there is no doubt that judge thought he was being terribly tolerant, and yet it led him to a situation where he was comparing Muslim women to the mentally disabled. The problem with multiculturalism is it puts nice liberal people into alliance with the most profoundly reactionary parts of immigrant communities against the very people we should be siding with. Women who want to live their lives their way, gay people who want to live their lives their way. And the problem with this is as well, it gets tied up with the language of respect. When I criticise Islam, as I criticise Christianity and Judaism and Buddhism, I was even once called fat by the Dalai Lama, I get told, no, you have to respect my beliefs. I respect you as a human being too much to respect your ludicrous superstitions. I do not respect a book that says I should be killed for being gay. I do not respect a book that says Mariam should be killed for being a so-called apostate. Indeed, I abhor that book, as I abhor the Bible and the Torah. And it is essential that we retain our freedom to be able to say that. We are finally in this country getting rid of our blasphemy law about Christianity. But at the same time, a de facto blasphemy law about Islam is being introduced, enforced not by the state, but by jihadis. Not very far from here, a brave man tried to publish a book, The Jewel of Medina. It's not a very good book, but it's a valuable book. I've only read extracts from it. And it begins the process that Mark Twain and George Eliot and Bertrand Russell and Spinoza and various people did about Christianity and Judaism. It asks basic questions. Christianity and Judaism have lost their power to terrorize people about masturbation or homosexuality or other perfectly natural things, largely because they've been ridiculed. They've been reinterpreted and they've been ridiculed. It is being made impossible for Muslims to do that. This book, The Jewel of Medina, asks a question that I think would inject doubt into most Muslims' minds. It is a fact, insofar as we can establish any historical facts about the man known to us as Muhammad. At the age of 53, he married a 6-year-old girl, and 3 years later he had sex with her. We don't know if that was common in Arabia at that time. There's some speculation about it. It may not have been. We do know that 9-year-old girls, whatever their culture, wherever they are, do not like being penetrated by 53-year-old men. Now actually, the Jewel of Medina implies that she enjoyed it. Now in any other context, that would be shocking. But the very fact that the book discusses that means that the publisher, not far from here, was firebombed. Now, it is essential for Muslims that we're able to question that, because it will actually retain their religion at the most infantilized and backward and terrorizing stage if they can't ask these questions. Imagine what Christianity would look like today if Mark Twain had been pulped and The Life of Brian was impossible to watch and George Eliot had been banned. It would be this would be a horrible place to live for people like me and a lot of people. Just one other very quick point. Another way of delegitimizing criticisms of Islam is to say that these are Western ideas. So I mentioned Bangladesh earlier. I was in Bangladesh earlier this year. In a children's home, I met a 15-year-old girl. She loved to sing. It was the thing she most loved. And when she turned 11, she was told she couldn't sing anymore because she was a girl and it was disgusting for Muslim girls to sing. And she said to me, that just seemed to me really stupid because this God thing just didn't seem right to me. And I thought, even if there was a God, why would he let boys sing and not girls? Now, she thought of that in a village in Bangladesh, all on her own. It had nothing to do with anyone in the West. I've met gay people in Gaza and women in Baghdad who had exactly the same thoughts. It is a natural thing that if you present a preposterous, superstitious piece of nonsense, naturally there'll be a significant number of people who go, what? That's not right. And the only way you stop them is to terrorize them. That's not Western. That's not about Western values versus anti-Western values. We're talking about culture. Whose culture are we talking about? The culture of Zainab, who wanted a divorce in Germany, or the culture of the man who wanted to beat the shit out of her? Now, we have to make a choice about that culture. It's like saying the culture of the Deep South was slavery. Well, there were some people called slaves who didn't think that was their culture. And a lot of people sided with them, and they prevailed.